The NHL playoffs are only a few weeks away, so while a team's position in the power rankings might not mean that much in comparison to their standings position, we still have to break down how each of these teams did last week. Let's get started at the very bottom with the two teams I think are in the competition for the #1 overall pick this year, and ironically, it's the last two teams that held the #1 overall pick, the San Jose Sharks and Chicago Blackhawks. Both terrible teams, both should have the best odds of having their pick of a guy like Schaefer, Misa, Higgins, whoever. But up above that, we have the garbage tier of teams who are not going to make the playoffs, but there are some very interesting teams to talk about. The Bruins, Flyers, Penguins, Predators, Kraken, Sabres, and Ducks all sit here in this tier. But amongst them, we have one of the best teams in the NHL over the last week, the Philadelphia Flyers, who went 3-1 last week, although admittedly 2 of those wins came against teams in this same tier, Nashville and Buffalo. But they did meet the Montreal Canadiens, who right now are in prime position to make a playoff push, only loss being to the Toronto Maple Leafs, which is understandable. Another team that's coming off a great week far too late is the Buffalo Sabres, who beat Ottawa and Washington, very impressive wins, as well as a win over Pittsburgh. But a loss of the Philadelphia Flyers does put a blemish on last week. But on the other side, we have the Boston Bruins, one of the worst teams over the last week. Only 2 losses last week, but they were both to very beatable teams in Anaheim and Detroit, and they got absolutely shellacked by the Ducks 6-2. That capped off an 8-game losing streak, and the Bruins have been one of the worst teams since the trade deadline. Team that is going to give me a lot of schadenfreude when I dig into their offseason plan. But let's get on to the teams that actually matter, including the 5 teams that are on the fringes of making the playoffs: the Red Wings, Utah Hockey Club, Rangers, Islanders, and Canucks. The Islanders didn't have a great week while they found themselves in pole position to make a playoff push. They had a bit of a tough schedule last week against Vancouver, Tampa, and Carolina, but going 0-3 in those games and giving up at least 5 goals in each of them, not a great look for the Islanders, who have seen their playoff hopes basically evaporate, which is why they're only on the fringes of making the playoffs and probably won't this year. One tier up, we have the Chaos Goblins, the Canadiens, the Flames, and the Blue Jackets, teams that are just not very good, but are somehow still making pushes for the playoffs. And at this point, it seems pretty inevitable that one of these teams is going to make the playoffs, that being the Montreal Canadiens, while the Flames, Blue Jackets didn't have bad weeks, but just ultimately have fallen out of the playoff pace. Moving up one tier, we have the teams that are solidly in the playoffs, those being the Devils, Wild. In the next tier up, the Vegas Golden Knights have escaped fraud watch, in my opinion, but the LA Kings still very much there. I know they've been on a bit of a heater in recent weeks, but they played some pretty crappy teams in that stretch, like Chicago, Boston, the Rangers, and the San Jose Sharks. Very few impressive wins in that bunch, and oh yeah, they can still only win at home. Next up though, we have a team in a new tier all its own, that being the fucking wagons that are the St. Louis Blues. My god, this team is incredible. They just cannot lose of late, and last week they beat Montreal and Colorado, 2 very tough teams, as well as the Nashville Predators. The Blues are now firmly in the playoff position. You know, head coach Jim Montgomery is just howling at how the tide has turned for his team and for his old team. One tier up from that, we have the cup contenders, teams who can win the cup but aren't the favorites right now, those being the Oilers, Golden Knights, Maple Leafs, Panthers, Lightning, Avalanche, and Hurricanes. No real big changes among them, but the next tier up, we have only one team, and that is the Washington Capitals, and I gulp nervously as the Caps are still at the top of the standings, but they just had probably the worst week of their entire season. Losing to Winnipeg in overtime and Minnesota is understandable, but getting shellacked by the Buffalo Sabres of all teams, just not acceptable for a team that is figuring to be the class of the East right now, which is why they are outside of the elite tier, which includes the aforementioned Winnipeg Jets and the Dallas Stars. Only a few weeks left for teams to lock in their positions and move up the power rankings. Let's see what chaos may reign.